This is Al Jazeera.
Live from Studio 14 here at Al Jazeera headquarters in Doha, I'm Hazem Seeker. Welcome to the News Grid. While the diplomats bicker at the UN in New York, the bombs keep falling near Damascus. The Syrian government and its Russian allies have targeted the rebel area of eastern Ghouta for a week now. At least 500 people have been killed, many of them civilians. We'll look at the human cost and why recapturing the area is so crucial for the regime. The hunt for more than 100 schoolgirls missing in Nigeria. The government sending more troops after Boko Haram fighters attacked their school. The latest kidnappings, though, are sparking more anger and demands for answers. We'll be live in Abuja. The immigration policies which are polarizing opinion and dividing Italians. Pro and anti-fascist demonstrators are on the streets before next week's parliamentary election, when far-right parties are expected to win big.
I'm Andrew Chappelle. A selfie taken by a member of a violent mob in India has sparked outrage online, showing a lack of empathy on social media. Connect with us throughout the show using the hashtag AJNewsGrid.
Hello, you're with the News Grid live on air, streaming online through YouTube, Facebook Live, and at aljazeera.com. Good to have you with us on this Saturday. We begin in Syria's eastern Ghouta, which has endured another 24 hours of almost relentless bombardment. Medical workers say the attacks don't stop long enough for them to count the bodies of those killed. At least 500 people in the past 7 days. Families are holed up in basements, children terrified as the bombs rain down. And on the other side of the world, diplomatic efforts to stop the fighting have failed yet again. There's widespread frustration after the Security Council delayed a vote on a resolution demanding a ceasefire across Syria. That vote is now due to happen in New York in about 2 hours from now. A spokesman for one of the armed groups opposing the government has condemned the failure of diplomacy to end the fighting.
What is going on now in eastern Ghouta is a humanitarian disaster and a shame on humanity. The current differences in bargaining that's taking place prove that the Security Council is morally weak. It's becoming a repeated problem there. I am saying it frankly, that the countries which claim they are friends of the Syrian people, if they really want to make any action, they would never have resorted to an institution that they know for sure is unable to help and is totally paralyzed because of the Russian veto.
Now, the pictures emerging from eastern Ghouta appear to show a deadly mix of weapons being used by Syrian government forces in one of the bloodiest assaults of this 7-year war. Andrew Chappelle explains.
Ghouta is just outside Damascus, a rebel-held area that includes the eastern suburbs of the capital, making it close enough for rebels to fire mortars into central Damascus and for Syrian forces to deliver a devastating response. Since February 18th, government forces have targeted a series of densely populated towns in the area. The UN says there are nearly 400,000 people there. That includes rebel fighters, but most are civilians.
For days, airstrikes and bombardments have forced families and children into underground shelters. We can't do anything. We can't even go outside to get food.
Some of the weaponry being used is designed to target underground hiding places. This video, shot by an activist in the Hamoria region on Wednesday, appears to show helicopters dropping vacuum bombs with their signature parachutes. Al Jazeera can't confirm these are vacuum bombs, but one weapons expert we spoke to says he's 99% sure they are. This weapon creates a pressurized shockwave and a vacuum, rupturing lungs and other internal organs. That's if the target doesn't die in the initial fireball. If that wasn't enough, the same area was later showered by incendiary cluster bombs. The UN Secretary General has described the situation as hell on earth, with weapons like these being used in a densely populated area just a few kilometers away from the Syrian capital. Andrew Chappelle, Al Jazeera.
All right, well, let's bring in Osama bin Javed, who is in the Turkish city of Gaziantep near the border with Syria. So, Osama, no let-up, it seems, in the fighting in eastern Ghouta. Latest reports saying up to 500 people killed.
Well, a let-up would be a welcome development because there has been escalation every single day in the last 7 days since Sunday. We've been hearing reports from the ground, from Hamuriya, from Kafr Batna, from Erbil, from various parts of Ghouta, where people say, I spoke to one activist this afternoon who said to me that before Sunday we would get a bombing or a shelling every day. Now it happens every hour. We can't even come out of our basements, is what he told us, that there are children who've been inside those basements for 2 days. They're scared. We've been getting videos of these children appealing to the world, asking the world to stop the bombing so they can go out and have something to eat. But most of Ghouta in the last 5 years has been leveled to the ground. I spoke to some activists who told us how these tunnel networks work, and they told us that people don't have basements under their houses in the regular construction in Syria. So they built these shelters. Now each shelter is holding multiple families. One shelter has up to 15 families with one bathroom for men and one for women, and things are extremely tough. Especially the children that we keep hearing about and we keep seeing pictures of. They make a fifth of the 500 people who've been killed, and they've been telling people about how difficult this ordeal has been on them.
انتوا وين كنتوا؟
كنا بالحجارية، انقصف بيتنا بالحجارية، اجينا على بيت كانوا عم يدورنا بيت بالحجارية، نزل فيل ثاني، انه فيل صغير الحمد لله ما تأثر، لو كان فيل كبير لكانت تهدد كل الحارة، بس عنا وقع بيتهم على الأرض كمان ما صار لهم شيء، الثاني كمان ما صار لهم شيء، بس 4 بيوت وقعوا على الأرض.
So medics have been telling us that it's not just medical aid that they can't provide, they can't even move between places. Ambulances have been taken out, at least 12 medical facilities are out of service, more than 24 have been targeted in the last 7 days. They say they were already running out of medical supplies. The Assad government was blocking all the humanitarian aid that was coming in via the United Nations into Ghouta, and consumables were not being allowed in. They don't even have bags to hold blood, so blood bags have even run out. So medics have been painting a very desperate picture. They've been saying that more than 2,000 people have been wounded in this latest onslaught. For months they've been trying to rally around this cause of trying to evacuate more than 500 people, but that number has gone up to more than 2,000, and it continues to rise as the bombings don't stop. We heard yesterday from a number of people inside Ghouta who pleaded to the United Nations and the outside world, saying, acknowledge that you know that we are here, acknowledge that you know that we are dying, acknowledge that we are being hurt and we are being wounded, and stop these bombs dropping on us.
Osama bin Javed, live for us there in Gaziantep, near the Turkish border with Syria. Thanks, Osama. Let's bring in James Deneselow now in London. He's a Syria researcher and also head of the conflict and humanitarian policy at Save the Children. Good to speak with you again, James. So let me ask you first of all, why does Eastern Ghouta matter right now in the Syrian conflict? Why is the Syrian regime targeting this area so heavily?
Well, I think what we've seen over the last year or so is, since the fall of Aleppo, the restoration of Syrian government control over certain areas that have been besieged for some time. And I think what we've really witnessed in the last week is the move from a slow death, which is besiegement and denial of food and aid, into this fast death, 500 deaths in the space of a week, 121 children at least. So I think when you've got nothing to sort of push back against that in terms of peace processes or diplomatic efforts, and we haven't seen Sochi or Astana or Vienna or Geneva deliver at this point, the world watches on with horror. And I think at the moment we're seeing what I think is safely said to be the sort of epicenter of human suffering on this planet is currently in Eastern Ghouta, and the United Nations attempts to find some form of ceasefire are in deadlock while people keep dying.
Yeah, as you say, the world watching in horror while diplomats at the UN are still trying to come to some kind of agreement on another ceasefire resolution. But why? I mean, there is a school of thought that says that the Russians are essentially playing for time at the UN, and that they are deliberately trying to delay this resolution while the fighting continues and while the Syrian government makes gains in eastern Ghouta. Is there any truth to that, do you think?
I'm not sure I entirely agree with that on the basis that the Russians have vetoed 10 Security Council resolutions already on Syria. So they've shown a willingness to reject a larger consensus at the UN around matters Syrian. They're obviously a key political and military actor on the ground there. I think it's very interesting to look at the language that they've suggested for this debated text that's gone through over the last few days. They're very keen to acknowledge the fact that rockets and artillery and shells and mortars have been fired from Ghouta to surrounding sites in Damascus and have killed civilians. They also want to bring an equivalency, I think, to what happened in Raqqa, where the American-led coalition liberated the city last year with large degrees of destruction, maybe not the same level of sort of media output from inside the city at the time. And I think the Russians are quite keen to say they're doing exactly what the Americans did in Raqqa in Ghouta. They are sort of looking to take out, as they call them, terrorists, and any other sort of collateral damage in terms of civilians is mistaken. It's not in design, but that's just what happened. So it's interesting to see that text go through. But I keep saying, the UN resolutions, we've had numerous ones on humanitarian access into areas of Syria. We've had the Astana process that the Russians lead themselves agree to humanitarian access in Syria. But there's actually, since that was agreed, we've seen less. We've seen less humanitarian access last year than the year before, 40% less, and we're seeing even less this year. So it seems like the politicization of people being able to get food and water and to get injured children out has reached a zenith in Syria. And this is international norms that are hemorrhaging as we speak.
And what is the fall of eastern Ghouta? What would that mean for the Syrian government if that were to happen?
Well, I think it would obviously mean more control of territory directly in their own capitals, which is a strategic choice for them. I think what's particularly interesting for us as humanitarians is that in previous conflicts within Syria, whether it's Homs or Aleppo, you've seen large numbers of civilians evacuated to largely the northwest, to Idlib, at the end of the battle. There's very little places for Syrian civilians who are in non-government controlled areas to go to now. I mean, Idlib's being squeezed, and there's maybe as many as 400,000 people in eastern Ghouta. If ground forces are sent into these areas where we've seen increasingly dense, populated people huddling in basements under heavy artillery, then the death toll would likely spike even further. And where are they going to go? Is there going to be any form of evacuation? Could that even happen? It seems very unlikely. And so while we hope that a UN resolution can give us some immediate ceasefire, some immediate aid to alleviate the situation in the short term, we should be not under any illusion that there is not any form of long-term strategy to help Syrian civilians. The world simply has run out of ideas, and that is the price that is being paid by men, women and children in Ghouta today.
Indeed. Good to speak with you, as always. James Deneselow for us there in London. Now, the Syrian government and Russia say they are only targeting rebel fighters, but people on the ground say the strikes have taken a devastating toll on hospitals. Aid workers and residents there say Syrian army helicopters have been dropping barrel bombs. These are oil drums packed with explosives and shrapnel on marketplaces, dropping them on marketplaces as well as medical centers. The World Health Organization is reporting that 24 of these medical facilities have been hit. That's about half, and half of them, rather, have had to close. Hospitals and clinics were already stretched after years of a government siege that's brought shortages of life-saving medicine and equipment. Well, Dr. Ahmad Tarakji is the president of the Syrian American Medical Society. He joins us now from Boston. Thanks very much for being with us, Doctor. So as we've been saying, this bombardment of eastern Ghouta is taking an unimaginable toll on the people there. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I understand that you have been speaking to the head of the medical office in Ghouta about that. What did he tell you?
It has been clear that over the last week, at least, that there has been direct targeting of ambulances and hospitals in a goal to collapse the civil society inside Ghouta. The frequent and deliberate targeting of those hospitals is similar to what happened in Aleppo in the past. And that explains why more than 24 hospitals and clinics were targeted directly And our medical capacity inside Ghouta, the capacity of the medical services had dropped to 40% from where it was a week ago.
And we mentioned there the World Health Organization documenting how many medical facilities have been hit. I understand as well that your organization wrote a letter to the WHO a few months ago asking for help and support, and you haven't got a response from them still.
Unfortunately, the WHO has not been very upfront about what is going on at this time. It is expected from them to take a strong position on protecting medical personnel and facilities, and also to be upfront about the lack of medical services. Many of those facilities in eastern Ghouta were visited by WHO teams and UN teams in the past. There are well-established medical facilities. So that disqualified the narrative from Russia and the Syrian government that we don't know what those facilities are. We know that those facilities are hospitals and they're serving people. At this time, we've been pushing really hard with every single member of the UN Security Council to include lots of narratives to protect hospitals inside Ghouta and to deliver aid to the people inside Ghouta. And unfortunately, those political games that we're seeing being played right now by Russia at the UN Security Council, unfortunately, they're causing lots of death, direct death on the people in Ghouta and prolonging that scenario until ceasefire is achieved. It's very simple. You should stop all the fire all across that's targeting civilians. You should stop all the fire, have unhindered access to the people inside Ghouta, and evacuate the medical patients that need to be evacuated. Very simple and straightforward. Unfortunately, they're trying to achieve some political points, and they're trying to score some points, and that's what's stopping that resolution right now from being adopted.
Yeah, it is a terrible situation all around for people there. We appreciate you talking to us about it. Dr. Ahmad Tarakji in Boston, thank you.